Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Hellhound. So what's interesting about this particular film for me is that I actually had first heard about this movie, I'm going to say a little over a year ago or maybe under a year ago. I don't remember the exact time frame, but for sure within that time. And I saw this trailer for the movie on Louis Mandylor's Instagram post around that time, as I mentioned before. And the one thing that stuck out for me the most really was the fact that now, for anyone who follows me on social media will know that, and check out my reviews here on the channel as well, will know that Louis Mandylor is one of my favorite actors of all time. I say this every single time I talk about a project that he's in, that he's one of my absolute favorites in the industry. And this guy's literally a jack of all trades and basically a Swiss man army knife in the industry. He's literally done everything that he's learned throughout his life to use in his career pretty much since he started. And it's quite an incredible story too, if you get a chance to listen to him talk about what he's learned and be able to incorporate the things he's learned here in this field. But the reason I'm pointing this out about Louis Mandylor is because something about his excitement about this movie really caught my attention when he first dropped the trailer on his account. And what was also interesting too is that apart from sharing his enthusiasm about the movie, is that thankfully the trailer looked amazing. It really looked really good, but it was just like a certain tone to the film that I really did appreciate. That I'm not saying I never got in any of his other movies as far as the grittiness and the dark matter is concerned, but somehow the look of the film also appealed to me as well too. That made me anticipate something much more darker than we're actually going to be getting here from what I saw in the trailer, and that's kind of more or less the case here. But I will also point out too that this movie is also available right now for you to check out. This movie came out, at least as of this recording, by the time this video gets dropped here, on January 12th. So it's available for you to rent and buy on Amazon, Apple TV, Vudu, and whatever other platforms out there as well. And the fact that this movie is being distributed by Wellgo USA, I believe, if I understand correctly, according to the director of this movie, Joshua Dixon, they will be releasing a physical copy of this film, I have to say, on Blu-ray and DVD, which I do plan on buying here, especially if they're going to have some wonderful bonus features, which I've been able to see online about what it took to make this movie. I'm extremely excited to see what they had to go through to get this film put together here, because what I saw in this movie, for me personally, I thoroughly enjoyed. And I really did love this movie. So of course, we'll get into the plot synopsis here, but I will not be getting into any spoilers here at all, because there's a lot about this movie that I think, I'm not gonna say the less you know, the better it is for you, but it's just that the events that occur in this movie aren't necessarily any sort of Sixth Sense ending by any means, but it's a really beautiful way of closing out the story from the journey that we're following with this character played by Louis Mandylor, and how it ends for me, I think is I'm going to say in a lot of ways a perfect ending for this story arc that we're following here. So again, I'll get into the plot synopsis, no spoilers, and then I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. As his final assignment, a burnt-out assassin hunts down a notoriously brutal Bangkok kingpin, but after a lapse in judgment sets him on a violent downward spiral, his last hit will devolve into an all-out war on the streets of Thailand. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie, I'm going to say right off the bat, is Louis Mandylor. I actually had messaged Louis when I was watching the movie in the very beginning and telling him I'm watching the film. I'm going to let you know what I think once I'm done watching the movie. And then more than halfway through the film, I messaged him again and I told him what I loved about the film so far, but primarily about his performance, because the reason why I'm pointing him out first is because I've listened to tons of interviews that Louis has done throughout the years. And one of the things he's brought up before about his upbringing is that, he's had a pretty rough life where he's seen some pretty horrible things growing up in the streets of Melbourne back in his youth. And one thing that led him to another, as far as, boxing, soccer, acting, stunts, among other things as well, that kind of more or less stems from what he has been able to experience, that more or less kind of gave him a pathway to finding some other opportunities to be able to use what he's experienced to infuse more or less in a lot of ways to his performances as well too. And I'm highlighting that here because considering the background that he had grown up in Australia, where he had a pretty hard life along with his brother too, his older brother Costas, you get to see that the character that he's playing in this movie no doubt has gone through a very hard life as well too, considering he's also an assassin as well, that he's seen some horrible things, done some very horrible things as well too. So I'm pointing that out because there's a certain authenticity that I believe that Lewis is able to bring, considering his background, his experiences, what he's gone through, the hard things he's seen, the horrible things he's seen, I meant to say, that would be able to justify the character's more or less stone cold approach and balanced look on certain things. And then at the same time, as I mentioned in the plot synopsis here, there's a certain ability that he's had before that's kind of got lost throughout the years, where, you know, the wear and tear on his, I would imagine his mentality, his body, among other things as well too, that he's kind of skipped the beat, where that is a very fatal mistake on his part, which in turn affects everyone else around him as well too. And what's also interesting too is that the character that we're following, that he plays in this movie, is that he said it very straight out, is that he doesn't trust anybody, but yet he's in an industry, or in a business rather, where he has to work with people that he cannot trust at all, but relies on them to do their part for him to be able to get his job done. But at the same time has to keep an alert at all times to be able to be aware of any sort of deceitfulness that will more likely come along the way as well too. And it's an interesting thing too, because that's one of the things that kept me invested about the story, but most importantly, kept me invested about his character, because I think Louis Mandylor, in my opinion, delivers one of his best performances that I've seen in quite some time. And the one thing about Louis that I've said before is that his performance in the movie The Debt Collector, the first one, made me a fan of him. And his performance in that film was so good in that movie that it blew me away, that I just never caught on with his work beforehand, even though I've seen many stuff he's been in before. But I'm grateful now that I've been able to keep up with his work since I saw that film for the first time a couple of years ago. And here we are now, a number of years later after the fact, and I'm still blown away with the performance he's able to give. And not to say that he's never given a phone-in performance, but, you know, I always know that he's always going to give 100% no matter what. But there's always a performance here and there that makes me realize that he's putting in that something about his excitement, or in the investments that he has with these roles, with certain roles I should say, where he really just goes all out. And in this particular film, you get to see there's this little something extra that I'm seeing in his performance in this movie that I would have seen in his previous films as well too. Again, that's not to disregard that I'm saying that he's phoning it in, those other roles he's played up. That's not what I'm getting here at all. But for some reason in this movie, I'm getting a feeling that he's putting something extra that really sticks out for me, that I picked up almost right away when I saw his performance throughout this entirety of this movie. So I know I kind of went off on a tangent about that, but I'm really emphasizing about Lewis's deliverance in this movie that really got my attention, because his investment, his the authenticity that he brings to his performance really caught my attention. And I think it's one of the best things about this movie right off the bat. Now, the other thing I'm also going to point out here too, does have to do with the overall story in itself. And this is a story that we've all seen before. This is nothing new at all, but I always find it interesting to see what the director and Lewis and all the other cast members and crew members too are doing to make this film interesting enough for you as the audience member to be invested in. And I really do believe that everyone that's worked in this movie have done a really good job in keeping the story rather interesting, but doing something that's, I wouldn't say it's majorly different, but trying from a different angle that I'm hoping that would be able to appeal to most people, especially fans of the action genre. Because at the end of the day, this movie is an action film, but I always found that this movie is a lot more than an action movie, because if you really think about it, when you follow the film, this is really truly a character study. Because when you find out what Lewis's character has gone through in his life, and then what he has to go through in this particular job, which is basically one last job where he has to kill a Bangkok mob boss, more or less, and his other cronies as well too. It's a lot more. There's a lot more to that story along the way, where he's going back to visit some friends, or in this case, acquaintances, friends that he hasn't seen in quite some time, and then the consequences of their reunion that takes place after the fact as well too, which is a very interesting journey that we're following, because you can tell that for some characters, them being reunited again, there's some hesitation, but there is an understanding along the way too that you're here for a reason, and I know you're here not to waste my time, so I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm certainly not going to waste my time as well too. So there's like an underlining understanding that comes with that I think shows very effectively throughout this narrative here. And then when the deceitfulness comes out along the way too, they also expected it as well. That's just part of the business that they are in at this point. So there's an unspoken set of rules that are presented that, at least for me, I picked up on. But everyone that delivers their performances, as far as the narrative is concerned, that's required for their performances, as far as why certain characters behave a certain way, why certain characters are resistant, but you don't see that resistance, but you just see the body language where they're having some hesitation. It makes sense for the overall story that we're following here. One other thing I want to point out here too, it does have to do with the directing under Joshua Dixon, because I'm not familiar with Joshua Dixon at all. In fact, I believe, if I recall correctly, this is actually his directorial debut, if I'm hearing this correctly from what I've seen in the previous interview he had done. And I think he did a really good job. One thing I want to point out about this particular directing that under his vision here, under Joshua's vision, I should say, is that what I really loved about the movie is that he gave the film a lot of scope. So what I mean by that is that clearly this is a low budget film and they didn't have a lot of time to make the movie. I remember, I think Lewis told me when I messaged him about me viewing the film, that I think they shot this movie in like 2 weeks, if I recall correctly. And what they've been able to pull off in a 2-week turnaround time and getting a wide scope of the environment that they're in. I'm not just talking about the jungles of Thailand. I'm talking about the cities, but also the smaller rooms that you see the characters are interacting with one another. So if they're in an apartment or a hotel room or some sort of bunkhouse or whatever else, it's a very self-contained environment, but you have plenty of space and scope to let that environment and the elements sink in, so that way when you see the characters interact with that environment, it all has a purpose for the overall narrative, and you have the time to have that sink in as the story progresses along the way, which is something that I think Joshua did a really good job at, in letting the environment be a character in the story as well too. And I will also want to point out too, with the action sequences in this movie, because I remember the first time I saw the trailer, I did like what I saw with the action sequences, but there was a part of hesitation on my end when it came to will it actually live up to the excitement as far as the level of action that we got in the trailer. That does it translate well in the overall narrative, and will it actually be good at the end of the day? And I'm happy to report that is the case here for me. I will say one thing though that I did notice in the movie the first time I saw, because I've seen this movie a total 2 times at this point, and I plan on seeing it a lot more after the fact. But when I saw the movie for the first time, I did notice that certain scenes were a little cranked up. As for anyone who doesn't know the terminology as far as cranking this under this particular context, is that basically I could tell you can tell that certain scenes were probably the choreography were probably done at a certain speed on set, and then I'm sure during the editing they were able just to crank it up a little bit, to heighten the speed up a little bit, to make things move more quickly. And I think it worked rather effectively, if I believe that's what they've done here, because it really does showcase the intensity of the action and the impact that the punches and the knives and the guns and the glasses that are being broken, and among other things as well too, that the level of violence that occur in this movie is not only justified, but a very grounded way of doing it as well too. I would even go as far as saying there's a slight element of, more or less to compare it to a John Wick element to it, where there is a certain heightened reality aspect to it, but it never goes beyond that threshold of like just leave all sorts of realistic licenses out the window. There is a sense of realism, but you can tell there's still a bit of a heightened reality along the way too, just for certain story beats to carry on along the way, which would make sense for the overall narrative that we're following here. But I do appreciate the fact that the hard work that they have emphasized on prepping for those action sequences, from what I understand that Joshua Dixon had talked about, that they really worked hard on that, so that way once they're able to shoot it on the day of, they're able to just get things moving quickly, and it does show on the screen. And I think everyone in this movie have done a really good job, especially with those action sequences, have done a really good job in getting all the beats in, but having it done in a way that does feel rather not only entertaining, but really grounded, very violent, in a lot of ways very draining as well too, because the beating that these guys go through is it's almost exhausting. And I'm not saying for me as an audience member to say that I'm tired of it. It's more in the sense of like, you feel the exhaustion these guys are going through, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities that everyone has in this movie, and that's including our hero played by Mandylor, where he's not some John Wick guy who's getting his ass whooped and he's able to pop back up and keep moving forward. He does have some vulnerability where he does need time to recover, and he needs some time to find a new way to deal with these the bad guys he's having to come across here. And what's also interesting too is that when you get to learn more about his character, there's certain things that he does along the way too that I wouldn't say is questionable, but you do wonder that, how, considering his job and what he has done in the past, like, is he really any better than the bad guys he's killing in this movie? Because there's a question of morality that comes along the way too, that even the character does present along the way, that I think was quite interesting, that we get to see that kind of weird dichotomy of the character, that we clearly know he's the hero, but without knowing too much about his past, you do feel like there's a sense of darkness where he's just done some really terrible things. But do you really want to know? Because what I see so far in this character in this movie, I like. And if I find more about his real, the darkness he's done in his past, do I really want to go down that rabbit hole to find out how bad of a person he's, or what terrible things he's really done that would make me look at him at a different light, if that makes any sense. So it's a really complex thing about the character that I did appreciate, but not just about him, but everyone else, including the villain in this movie too. I think the actor's name escapes me right now, but I will say that his character, we know that he's the bad guy, and this is gonna be transition to my negatives here, because even though I love this movie, there's a lot of great things about the film that I do like. I don't have any major negatives about the film. It's more just about a mixed reaction to a lot of things that I've come across in this movie. That's including the villain as well too. So I guess for that purpose here, let's go and get into my negatives now. So as I mentioned before, the negatives that I have in this movie aren't really just negatives as far as like what I didn't like about the film. It's really more just about a mixed reaction that I had towards the movie in certain aspects of the film, I should say, because when it came to the villain in this movie, honestly, I felt like he was the weakest part of the film. And that's not to say that the actor that played him was not good. He was great. He's actually really good. I just felt the emphasis on like how powerful this guy really is, I felt was kind of lacking in my opinion. But again, that's not to take away that the as far as like who the bad guy is and what he's capable of doing here is not shown. He's really shown as far as like what lengths he's willing to go to more or less stay on top, and you find more about him as well too as the story progresses, where you realize the type of person that he really is, which is very interesting for this particular story. But even with that angle of the story, it doesn't go very far for me, where I felt like there probably going to be a lot more to expand on that side story with the character. We get to learn more about who he really is, more or less behind closed doors, which I think is very interesting, that I would have liked to explore more for the character here. But again, that's not to say that the actor or the character didn't work. The actor, the character himself worked phenomenally. I just want a little bit more out of the character, where I felt like we could have used more to be able to get a really deeper emphasis on like what else he could do to truly feel the more or less his evilness, if you will. I will also point out too that I said earlier, I'm not going to get into spoilers here, but I actually messaged Lewis after I saw the film and expressed how much I really did enjoy this movie. But there's two things I was mixed about this film, and it's going to be very difficult for me to explain what that is, because that's really going to spoil everything for this movie if I delve in too much into it. But I will say this here: there is a part of the movie that is truly beautiful when it comes to Lewis's character in the film, where he's questioning God himself, motivation, among other things as well too, in a conversation he's having with someone. I'm not going to reveal who that person is, but that person is very integral in this particular scene here. And the way that particular scene ended, I thought would have been a perfect ending for the movie. In fact, I would have loved if it stayed there. But then it progresses, then it continues on after the fact. And I'm not going to reveal what happens there, but the way that story ended, I thought worked well too. But I'm conflicted with that because they're both really good endings, but one I felt was better than the other. And it's going to be the first part that I saw that I thought the way the story should have ended would have been a perfect note to finish the story off there. But at the same time, I feel like I understand with where they were going as far as, the consequences of what the character catching up, in this case, with Lewis Mandylor's character catching up to him here. I felt that was quite good, but some ways I felt like it was a little tacked on for me. But it's going to be hard for me to explain, to go more in depth here without revealing what it is, because I'm probably not doing a really good job, but I'm hoping you guys may understand with what I'm referring to here when you guys do check out the film, and I hope you all do go out of your way to check out this movie. But again, as far as any like real negatives are concerned, I don't really have any of it. Now, I will be the first to admit it's not a perfect movie, but I still found the film quite enjoyable. That any sort of negatives I did have about the film, they're really minuscule, and I didn't have any problems with those negatives that I came across in the movie. In fact, I'm not going to say it was part of its charm, but it was one of those things where the positive outweighed the negative by a long, long mile, that it just became an afterthought and didn't really care much for it at that point, because everything else about the movie worked so well that it was like I just didn't care at the end of the day. But as far as those mixed aspects of the film that I had about the movie, those are the areas that I really wish that could have been handled a little bit better, to a point where you had more time with the villain as far as expanding more about his but just certain side stories that we get from the character, which we do have some time spent with him. But I just actually wanted a little bit more to have the emphasis of like why that particular aspect of the villain's side story was really important. And it was important, but when I think about it, it was almost like it was just there. It didn't have much of an impact at the end of the day, much of a payoff, if that makes any sense. Whereas the ending, on the other hand, I felt like the way one part of the film ended should have stayed like that, but then something else was added on, was continued on after the fact, and it worked. But it kind of had it was a little lackluster in comparison to what I got previously, that I thought worked much more effectively, in my opinion there. So those really are my overall thoughts as far as my negatives are concerned, if you want to call it that. But overall, I really did love this movie here. So now let's get into my rating. So as you already know, I really did enjoy this movie. In fact, I am going as far as saying I love this film. I think that this is going to be a movie that I'm hoping will catch on and have a lot of people going out of the way to check out the film and talk about it at great lengths, because there's a lot of great qualities that I do believe this movie has here, but primarily with the performances and the story that we're following here, because there's a lot of wonderful nuances that everyone offers here when it comes to the delivery of the lines, the story beats that we've seen before, but offering it in a way that can keep us as the audience member, and I hope that will accomplish for everybody that checks out the film, to keep them invested with the story from start to finish here. And I think that under the direction of Joshua Dixon, he's done a really good job in pacing out the film beautifully, in my opinion. And again, with the performances we get from everybody in this film, and I gotta point out here before I forget, because I didn't want to forget this here, because there are a number of actors that I came across in this movie, and I had to pull out my phone here to look at the names here, because I'm going to do a terrible job in pronouncing a lot of these actors' names here. One actor that I caught right away when I saw him in the movie, in this film, Hellhound, was Vidhaya Pingsring Arm, I think is how I pronounce his name. I saw him in this movie, and I was like, I know I've seen him from somewhere. So I looked up in his IMDb page, I meant to say, and saw that he was in Only God Forgives, where he has a substantial role in that movie, which is a film that stars Ryan Gosling. Now, I really did enjoy that movie. It's not a film for everybody, I can tell you that right now, but I thought that was a very good film. And he has a great fight scene with Ryan Gosling in that movie, where he beats the fuck out of him. But he was really good in that movie. Another actor that I came across in this film, Hellhound, is another actor that I've seen in a few other movies that take place in Thailand. Quite a few of them with Rob Medina. One actor that I'm pointing out here is the name of Sahajak Boon Thanakit. He's been in The Marine 2. What else? Fistful of Vengeance, and a few other productions as well too. Again, mostly based out in Thailand. So he was someone that I was very familiar with, because he has a small little scene in the movie. And then of course there's one actor that I saw, and I said I know I've seen him from somewhere. His name is Von Quattro. He did a movie with Adam Hampton that's directed by Kyle Kawiki Harris called Out of Exile, where he played Adam Hampton's father in the movie. I thought he was great in this movie. He is really good in this movie. So a lot of familiar faces of actors that I've seen in previous films before that are all in this movie. And I just thought it was a real big joy for me to see these familiar faces doing some incredible work with a really good director, but also working with one of my favorite actors of all time, in Louis Mandylor. So I really did enjoy the film on so many levels here, but just not just for the story, but just for the other aspects of it as well too, as far as the people that are involved with this project here. So I loved it, and I highly recommend you guys to check out this film, because I guess, as I said before, this movie is available for you to rent it on Amazon, Apple TV, Vudu, or whatever the platforms you can rent it and buy it. So I do recommend it. So for me, I say this movie is a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, if you have seen this movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. And as I've already mentioned before, this movie is available for you guys to rent it on Amazon, Apple TV, Vudu, whatever other platform you can rent and buy it. And in fact, I'll have a link in the description down below where you guys can do so, because I really do believe it's worth your time to check out this film. So spend money in it, support these guys, because they've made an incredible movie here. And I'm a big supporter for indie filmmakers and indie actors, because the amount of work that these guys do at such a high level with very limited budget, time, locations, whatever else, you can tell that in this film in particular, that they've taken advantage of everything they've been able to use in its full capacity and not use anything and make a waste out of it here. Everything that you see in this movie was used to its full potential, and it paid off, in my opinion, at the end of the day. So I highly recommend you guys go out of your way to check out this film. And while you're doing all that, if you haven't done so already, make sure you guys subscribe to the NRW, hit the notification while you're down there as well too, as subscribe to the channel. And also make sure you follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts, on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I hope you guys are having a wonderful start to 2024. And until next time, everybody, stay safe out there, and cheers.